Greetings and welcome to the English Learner Reclassification Rubric Introduction and Training. This video is provided by the English Learner Support Division of the Texas Education Agency in order to support local education agencies in utilizing the English Learner Reclassification Rubric as part of the subjective teacher evaluation within the English Learner Reclassification criteria for the 2018-2019 school year. Let's begin. First, let's take a look at the agenda for this training. We will start with discussing important terminology used within the training and associated resources. Then we will discuss the subjective teacher evaluation as part of the English Learner Reclassification criteria. Next, we will look at the English Learner Reclassification Rubric development. And finally, discuss the usage of the English Learner Reclassification Rubric beginning in this 2018-2019 school year. Let's take a look at some of this terminology. First of all, defining our students, English learners, an EL. An English learner is a student who is in the process of acquiring English and has another language as the primary language. English learner is synonymous with the terms of English language learner, ELL, and limited English proficient, LEP, as utilized in the PEIMS TSDS system. Also, let's take a look at the term of English proficient, or EP. An English proficient student is a student who has met reclassification criteria and is no longer identified as an English learner. English proficient is synonymous with the terms of non-EL, or non-English learner, non-ELL, non-English language learner, and non-LEP, or non-LEP of limited English proficient, which is utilized within the PEIMS TSDS system. Now let's take a look at the difference between reclassification and exit. Reclassification is the process by which the Language Proficiency Assessment Committee, the LPAC, determines that an English learner has met the appropriate criteria to be classified as English proficient, EP. Whereas exit is the point at which an English learner has met reclassification criteria and no longer requires bilingual or English as a second language, or ESL, program services. A student exits with parent approval. So in some cases, you may have an English learner who meets reclassification criteria and is reclassified as English proficient or non-LEP as it is currently in PEIMS, the TSDS system. But that reclassified English learner who is now English proficient and no longer an English learner may remain in a bilingual or ESL program with parent approval. Or the LPAC may recommend that the now reclassified English proficient student exits the bilingual or ESL program with parent approval. Finally, let's take a look at the term of the English Learner Reclassification Rubric, which will go into depth within this training. The English Learner Reclassification Rubric is an evaluation tool to be used for documentation of the subjective teacher evaluation portion of the reclassification criteria for English learners. This term is synonymous with the term of student exit rubric in the Texas SS State Plan. And again, SS stands for the Every Student Succeeds Act. So let's begin by looking at the reason for the English Learner Reclassification Rubric by taking a deeper dive into the Texas SS State Plan for Title III Part A. In SEA, the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, Section 3113B2, it discusses the entrance and exit procedures. It asks to describe how the SEA, the State Education Agency, will establish and implement with timely and meaningful consultation with LEAs, or local education agencies, representing the geographic diversity of the state, standardized statewide entrance and exit procedures, including an assurance that all students who may be English learners are assessed for such status within 30 days of enrollment in a school in the state. So this portion of ESSA, Title III, Part A, sparked several changes here within the Texas State Plan. So first of all, we will notice that a standardized statewide program exit procedure was necessary. The proposed Texas ESSA State Plan, Title III, Part A section states, determination of English proficiency and recommendation for program exit are based upon the following standardized exit criteria in accordance with TEC 29.056G. And one of those pieces is the results of a subjective teacher evaluation using the TEA-approved student exit rubric. And remember back in our terminology that at the time of the writing of the Texas ESSA State Plan, the term of student exit rubric was utilized and has now been adjusted to our current term for this rubric, being the English Learner Reclassification Rubric. So the subjective teacher evaluation is a portion of the overall English Learner Reclassification criteria. Currently, Texas allows for teachers to utilize a variety of data sources, such as student portfolios, anecdotal notes, etc., to inform the subjective teacher evaluation portion of the reclassification criteria. Beginning this school year in 2018 to 19, teachers will need to utilize a single TEA-approved instrument, which is what we're discussing today, the English Learner Reclassification Rubric, to inform the subjective teacher evaluation portion of the reclassification criteria and ensure that Texas has a standardized statewide exit procedure. So you can clearly see here that due to the Texas ESSA State Plan, Title III, Part A, and the requirement for standardized statewide program exit procedures, the English Learner Reclassification Rubric has been developed and will be utilized within this school year, 2018-2019. So let's take a look at the current overall reclassification criteria for 2018-2019. You will notice, and this information is posted on our TEA Bilingual and ESL Programs webpage. You will notice here in the English Learner Reclassification criteria chart that there are specific criteria across grade levels from first grade to 12th grade. So in conjunction with Texas Administrative Code, Chapter 89, Subchapter BB, a student may not be reclassified prior to the end of the school year and not earlier than grade 1. Across the top, you can see the first requirement for oral, speaking, and listening proficiency. Currently, we're utilizing a list of approved tests, but again, with our continued revisions to our procedures based on our Texas ESSA State Plan for Title III, Part A, next school year, 2019-2020, we'll be moving to a statewide single assessment, which we'll take a look at in the next slide. So we have our oral language proficiency assessment across for grade 1 through 12. Then, as you can see, our English reading requirement across, norm reference assessments for reading and language in grades 1 and 2 and 11 and 12, and then STAR reading for grades 3 through 10. And the English writing component is also then covered by the list of approved tests for the writing assessments. Now then you see the subjective teacher evaluation portion. Well, no longer is it coming soon. In fact, at the time of this posting of the video, you will also notice this updated English Learner Reclassification chart for 2018-19 will be updated to link to our English Learner Reclassification Rubric, which will be used to justify and provide that single statewide object for utilizing the evaluation of the subjective teacher evaluation. So looking into next school year, 2019-20, the English Learner Reclassification will likely look like this. Now, this is a draft currently, and we'll have much more information as it is posted for next school year, but you can get an idea of what the reclassification criteria for next school year will look like with a single statewide assessment for English language proficiency being the TELPAS assessment. The state standardized reading assessment, then again, we will have a single statewide assessment for a norm reference achievement test for grades 1 and 2 and 11 and 12. And then again, still STAR reading for grades 3 through 10, which include the English 1 and 2 EOCs. And then finally, we will continue with the subjective teacher evaluation portion being administered through the English Learner Reclassification Rubric that we're looking at today. So let's talk a little bit about the English Learner Reclassification Rubric development. First of all, the purpose. The purpose of the English Learner Reclassification Rubric is to comply with the requirements of ESSA Title III Part A. Also, to increase the statewide consistency in reclassification decision-making. And finally, to develop a rubric to be used statewide for providing the subjective teacher evaluation portion of the reclassification criteria. This, again, is helping to provide consistency across the state with this portion of the reclassification criteria per ESSA state plan, Texas ESSA state plan for Title III Part A. The process. The process as part of the development for the English Learner Reclassification Rubric has been as follows. The TEA English Learner Support Division developed 4 draft versions of a rubric. Stakeholders provided input at various conference sessions in March, April, and July of 2018, which included various stakeholders, including teachers, administrators, education service center support, and bilingual and ESL coordinators, as well as federal programs coordinators. Furthermore, the rubric was finalized based on stakeholder input, and year 1 implementation begins this school year in 2018-2019. The TEA English Learner Support Division provides training on the English Learner Reclassification Rubric, which is what you are participating in currently with this video. And the rubric will be revised based on year 1 implementation from this school year and updated training to be provided in the summer of 2019. So your feedback on the usage of the English Learner Reclassification in this first year of implementation will be vital in revising the English Learner Reclassification Rubric for next year's usage. Finally, as part of the development of the English Learner Reclassification Rubric, there were some key guiding principles that guided its development. Observation and evidence-based perspectives on English learners' readiness for reclassification as English proficient. So the pieces of the English Learner Reclassification Rubric are to provide these types of supports in determining beyond the assessment data. This English Learner Reclassification Rubric provides more anecdotal observation and evidence-based perspective that is not readily available within the test data of the other elements of the English Learner Reclassification criteria. Another key guiding principle is for the English Learner Reclassification Rubric to be user-friendly and minimally burdensome. We do not want this to create much more additional documentation, but to streamline that documentation across the state. Distinct from other instruments used in the reclassification criteria. So as mentioned, similar to point number 1, this information in the English Learner Reclassification Rubric should be distinct from the information already obtained through other assessments such as TELPAS, STAR, and norm referenced achievement tests. the focus on English language proficiency with or without second language support, and not focused on the level of content knowledge. So the hope is that this English Learner Reclassification Rubric will be able to distinguish between the student's content knowledge and his or her proficiency in English, even more so than our other assessments within the English Learner Reclassification criteria. And finally, another guiding principle of the English Learner Reclassification Rubric is for classroom-based evidence, such as a student's ability to interact meaningfully in classroom discussions, group work activities, and independent work that involves the reading, writing, listening, and speaking of academic English. So again, this English Learner Reclassification will be able to be a platform for the teacher to provide these types of classroom-based evidence of the student's usage and meaningful participation with English. Now let's take a look at the English Learner Reclassification Rubric usage beginning in this school year, 2018-2019. Usage criteria. Let's start by looking at the teacher. A certified bilingual and/or ESL teacher serving the English learner and has clear understanding of the student's ability to participate and succeed in classroom instruction. So this would be the criteria for the teacher who is filling out the English Learner Reclassification Rubric. If a teacher is on a bilingual education exception or ESL waiver and does not currently have his or her certification in bilingual education, or appropriately for English as a second language, the teacher who receives targeted professional development in accordance with the district's requirements for an exception or waiver to serve the English learner would be the one to fill out the English Learner Reclassification Rubric. Now let's take a look at the student criteria for the English Learner Reclassification Rubric. The English Learner Reclassification Rubric is intended for selected English learners who the teacher and/or the LPAC considers ready for reclassification and potential program exit, and who achieved TELPAS scores in the advanced or advanced high levels in the previous school year. So the English Learner Reclassification Rubric will not need to be completed for every English learner. However, the LPAC, in conjunction with the English learners' teachers, can determine which English learners have a potential for reclassification in the current school year. This could be based on previous test scores, such as TELPAS scores for the previous school year, and current classroom and district data within the current school year that suggests that the student is ready for reclassification and potentially to be exited from the bilingual or ESL program. One additional piece to add to the student criteria for the usage of the English Learner Reclassification Rubric is that we must keep in mind that English learners who have received certain designated supports on STAR may not be reclassified within that year. So it is important for the teachers and the LPAC to work together to ensure that appropriate designated supports are provided or are not provided as appropriate for the English learner in that school year, so that the student may appropriately be reclassified if the student meets the appropriate criteria. Documentation and decision-making as part of the usage of the English Learner Reclassification Rubric. Documentation. The LPAC will include in the child's permanent record a copy of the English Learner Reclassification Rubric for each student that is being considered for reclassification. In cases where the teacher indicates on the English Learner Reclassification Rubric that an individual student is not yet ready for reclassification, the teacher will document their reasoning in the space provided on the English Learner Reclassification Rubric, which we will take a look at here in just a moment. And the teacher may also share with the LPAC anecdotal records, student work samples, etc., to support their recommendation. This is in particular if the student has met all of the other criteria for reclassification and the teacher's evaluation of the student using the English Learner Reclassification Rubric differs from the other testing data. So let's take a look at that decision making. The subjective teacher evaluation, as documented on the English Learner Reclassification Rubric, is one of 4 reclassification criteria considered by the LPAC and may prevent a student from exiting the program. So just as we looked at the English Learner Reclassification criteria earlier in this video, we noticed that the subjective teacher evaluation portion of the English Learner Reclassification criteria is one piece of the reclassification criteria and can prevent a student from being exited from the program. However, it is vital that the teacher who is providing this information on the English Learner Reclassification Rubric has supporting documentation on justifying his or her reasoning. Together, as an LPAC, however, if the student, the English learner, has met all of the testing requirements for being reclassified as an English learner through the oral language proficiency test, the norm reference test or STAR reading assessment as appropriate per grade level, and the writing instrument as appropriate per grade level, yet the subjective teacher evaluation portion is not determining that the child is appropriate for reclassification. As a whole, the LPAC together, taking in consideration the input from the teacher, may determine as a whole that since the English learner has met all of the testing criteria, that the English learner may be reclassified. However, if a teacher on the subjective teacher evaluation using the English Learner Reclassification Rubric determines that the student is not ready, is ready for reclassification, but the English learner does not meet one or all of the other testing requirements, such as the oral language proficiency test, the norm reference assessment, or STAR reading assessment, or writing assessments for the appropriate grade level, the student may not be reclassified. Again, the English learner must meet all of the testing requirements per the appropriate grade level in order to be reclassified. The subjective teacher evaluation portion using the English Learner Reclassification Rubric is a piece that of the reclassification criteria that the LPAC can use in conjunction with the assessment data to determine that the English learner is not yet ready for reclassification. But the English Learner Reclassification Rubric, as documenting the subjective teacher evaluation, cannot solely be utilized as criteria for reclassifying a student. The student must also meet the other 3 components of the reclassification criteria for assessment in his or her appropriate grade level, as we looked at earlier in the English Learner Reclassification criteria chart. So let's look at this overview of the English Learner Reclassification Rubric. This is the actual teacher documentation form that will be fillable as it is posted online. Just so that you can see the overall document, let's take a look at the different features. At the top, in the upper right-hand corner, you have a place to put the student's name and grade level. And at the top, this is giving some instructions saying that this document fulfills requirements in TEC 29056G3 for the subjective teacher evaluation component of the reclassification criteria for English learners, providing teacher documentation of the student's academic English language proficiency and informing the LPAC of the student's readiness for reclassification as English proficient with potential placement in a general education classroom setting. In just a moment, we will open up this rubric to more closely look at the detailed descriptors. But you can see across the top, we're looking here at academic language use. In the left column, we're determining the description of the receptive skills of the student. Those are listening and reading skills. And in that left column, the teacher who is filling out this English Learner Reclassification Rubric will select the top or the bottom. They will select one of those choices for the description of the receptive skills, the listening and reading skills of the student. In the right column, the teacher will be selecting one of these two descriptors for the expressive skills or productive skills of the student, which are speaking and writing skills. At the bottom of this form, you can see a very important statement that the English learner, the teacher who is filling out the English Learner Reclassification Rubric will need to document. This statement says, this student routinely demonstrates the readiness for reclassification as English proficient and the ability to successfully participate in grade level content instruction that is delivered with no second language acquisition support. The teacher will document yes or no and can provide an explanation there in the comment section above and attach any additional supporting documentation. There's a place for the teacher to write his or her name and to sign the document and the date that he or she has completed this reclassification rubric, which should be at the end of the school year when the LPAC is determining a student's readiness for reclassification. So again, we're about to open up the document and look a little bit more closely at the descriptors, but you'll be able to find the English Learner Reclassification Rubric on our TEA Bilingual and ESL Programs webpage. And if you have any further questions or feedback, you can contact us directly at englishlearnersupport@tea.texas.gov. So let's take a look a little bit more closely at the rubric. Okay. So, as we can see here, when selecting the description for the receptive skills, for instance, for listening and reading, you can choose between these two categories. The grade appropriate at the top, it says grade appropriate with no second language acquisition support needed to be successful, as in the student routinely demonstrates listening and reading comprehension skills comparable to English proficient grade level peers. The student is able to construct meaning when reading grade appropriate text, and the student rarely needs speakers to slow down, repeat, or rephrase during conversations and academic discussions. The student receives written and oral information with no need for second language acquisition support to be successful with grade appropriate content. Now, notice very clearly the difference between this top selection and the next selection, which is grade appropriate with some second language acquisition support needed to be successful. Whereas you can see here that this student is not yet comparable to English proficient grade level peers. And the student at times relies on linguistically accommodated text features to construct their meaning for abstract grade appropriate text in particular. And the student comprehends conversations and discussions, but relies at times on pauses for processing time, requests for repetition, visual cues, and requests for clarification with less familiar topics. So to make a distinction here when it's talking about no second language acquisition support, as we know, all students are learning academic English in all grade levels and all subject areas, whether they are English learners with a primary language other than English, or whether they are students who have a primary language of English being their primary language. All students are acquiring academic English in all grade levels and in all subject areas. So all teachers in all subjects will be using language support, particularly academic language support, to help all students to access the vocabulary, terminology, and complex syntax or sentence structure in English in all content areas and all grade levels. This is distinctly different than second language acquisition support, which would be particular to a student who is learning English as a second language. So it is important to note that although all students may need particular language support, particularly in vocabulary, in all grade levels and in all subject areas, this here is making a distinction for second language acquisition support. Is that student needing continual second language acquisition support, which is diversely different than the typical access that teachers are providing support with all students in accessing new academic content material for the appropriate grade level and content area. On the right side here, we're looking at the description of the expressive skills for speaking and writing. Let's look a little closer. In the top, we could select either that the student is grade appropriate with no second language acquisition support needed to be successful, as in the student routinely, again, notice the same word here used across this top, routinely expresses thoughts and ideas in speaking and in writing at a level comparable to English proficient grade level peers. The student uses grade appropriate content-based vocabulary and grammar effectively in oral and written communications. The student communicates orally with few pauses and minimal errors that block communication. The student produces oral and written materials with no need for second language acquisition support to be successful with grade appropriate content. So notice again that here we're focusing on the student not needing second language acquisition support and not making errors that block communication. So a child would not need to be prevented from reclassification because of minor grade appropriate language acquisition, typical language, academic language acquisition errors. So we're not speaking about when a student makes an error as common to any learner of English, even as their primary language when in regards to academic language. Here, again, we're making a distinct difference as to the need for second language acquisition support and errors that are common with such as learning English as a second language. And then we have the choice then for the student not being ready for reclassification by choosing the bottom right descriptor, grade appropriate with some second language acquisition support needed to be successful. The student expresses thoughts and ideas in speaking and writing that are nearly but not yet comparable to English proficient grade level peers. The student uses grade appropriate content-based terms on familiar topics with some errors in complex grammar usage. Student expresses grade appropriate ideas in writing with emerging grade appropriate vocabulary, but at times relies on second language acquisition supports to express ideas effectively in oral and written English. So again, overall, you can see that on the left side, we're determining whether no second language acquisition support is needed or some routinely, consistently second language acquisition supports are needed for listening and reading skills, those receptive skills. On the right, we're determining either that the student for their expressive skills of speaking and writing have no need for second language acquisition support or still do routinely need some second language acquisition support to be successful. As you can also notice, these are both pretty high levels of English proficiency. Again, the English Learner Reclassification Rubric should only be filled out for English learners who are potentially ready for reclassification. And so that is why you do not see further descriptors on lower levels of English language proficiency here. We're really just trying to make a distinction between those who are close to those areas of reclassification in conjunction with the whole English Learner Reclassification criteria for all of their assessment data. Again, there's a portion here for the teacher to make their comments, and then very important that the teacher is classifying that either yes or no, that the child is ready to be reclassified and to enter grade level content instruction that is delivered without second language acquisition support, and being able to attach any additional documentation as needed. Thank you so much for your time in learning about the English Learner Reclassification Rubric. If you have any further questions or need any further support, please contact the English Learner Support Division at the TEA at englishlearnersupport@tea.texas.gov.